He leaned across the table and wrapped his hand around her wrist so hard she felt the bones shift. Not a grab, a statement. "You think you can walk away from me?" Han Min-seok's voice dropped to something barely above a breath, his lips curling into the smile she used to mistake for affection. "You think because we're in some cafe in Seoul, you're safe? You're never safe, Nia. Not from me." The other patrons didn't look up. The barista wiped the counter. A couple near the window laughed about something on a phone screen, and Nia Brooks sat across from the man she had married 6 years ago, the man who had spent 4 of those years methodically dismantling her, and felt the familiar cold spread through her chest like ice water through a crack in stone. She had told herself she was ready for this, the final divorce mediation, the last signature, the last time she would ever have to sit across a table from Han Min-seok and pretend she wasn't terrified. She had not been ready. "Let go of my wrist," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected, which surprised her so much that she almost lost it immediately after. Min-seok didn't let go. He leaned closer instead, and she could smell the mint he always chewed to mask the soju, and something inside her stomach clenched with the muscle memory of 1,000 mornings that had smelled exactly like this. "I've been talking to people," he said quietly, "about your little business, about the contracts you've been pulling since you decided you wanted to play career woman over here. It would be a shame if someone started making calls, telling the right people the wrong things about your work ethic, your reliability." He tilted his head, studying her face the way he always did when he wanted to see exactly how deeply the blade had gone in. "You'd be finished in this city before the ink dried on those papers." The cafe felt very small suddenly. The noise from the street outside seemed to come from another country. "And your car," he continued, almost conversationally now, settling back slightly but not releasing her wrist. "That parking garage on Mapogu. 3rd floor, right? You park in the same spot every Tuesday. I wonder sometimes whether the brake lines on those imported vehicles are really as reliable as they claim." Nia stopped breathing. She had spent 6 years learning the geography of his cruelty, where the sharp edges were, how much pressure he could apply before she cracked. But this was something different. This wasn't the old language of control. This was something that sat just on the other side of a line she had not imagined him crossing. "And if all of that somehow still doesn't convince you to see reason about the inheritance," he said, his voice dropping even further, so quiet she had to lean in slightly to hear him, which she realized too late was exactly what he wanted, "then I have other people who handle things I don't want to handle personally. You understand what I'm telling you?" She understood. She had grown up in Atlanta, the daughter of a woman who had worked double shifts at Grady Hospital, and still found the energy to teach her daughter that the world owed her nothing but that she owed herself everything. She had gotten a degree, built a portfolio, moved to Seoul for love, the kind of love that had felt enormous and terrifying and real, and had turned out to be a costume that something ugly wore for the first few months before it got comfortable enough to take it off. She understood exactly what Han Min-seok was telling her. She just couldn't make her body move. "You're going to sign that inheritance over," he said, "today. And then we're going to tell the mediator there was a misunderstanding about several of the other terms, and you're going to agree with everything I say. And then this is all going to be very simple." He squeezed her wrist once more, precisely, like punctuation, "or it's going to be very complicated." A voice came from the table to their left. It was calm, not loud, not theatrical, the kind of voice that had never needed volume to fill a room. "She parks on the 2nd floor, the voice said. "Not the 3rd. You'd want to get that right, if you were serious about it." Min-seok's head turned slowly. The man at the adjacent table had a cup of black coffee in front of him, barely touched. He was perhaps mid-40s, dressed in a dark suit that didn't announce itself, hair slightly longer than corporate convention would suggest. He wasn't looking at Min-seok. He was looking out the window at the street below, as if commenting on the weather. "Who are you?" Min-seok said. The man finally turned his head. His eyes moved to Min-seok with the unhurried patience of someone who has never once in his adult life been in a situation that required urgency. "You told her," the man said, switching flawlessly from Korean to English for a single sentence and then back, "that you would make her disappear if she refused to sign. You said you had people for things you didn't want to handle yourself." A pause. I'm curious whether you'd like to say that again now that someone else has heard it. The cafe had not gone silent. That was the strange thing Nia would remember later. The barista was still moving. The couple by the window was still laughing. The city was still doing what the city did. But something had shifted in the specific radius of air around these three people, something that had no sound but tremendous weight. Min Seok released her wrist. She didn't register it immediately. The pressure had been there so long in the last 60 seconds that its absence felt like a physical thing. "This is a private conversation," Min Seok said. His voice had changed. Not much. He was too controlled for that, but enough. Something underneath the confidence had moved. "It was," the man said, and then it became something else. He lifted his coffee cup, took a single sip, set it back with a precision that seemed almost deliberate. "You mentioned three specific things: her business contacts, her vehicle, and people you use for problems you'd rather not be attached to." He looked at Min Seok with an expression that was not anger, was not threat, was something more difficult to name than either of those. "I have a very good memory." Min Seok stood up. He was not a small man. He had the particular physical confidence of someone who had spent years using his size to reframe conversations, and Nia had watched it work on her for years. He used it now, rising to his full height and looking down at the seated figure. The seated figure did not move, did not look up, did not adjust his posture, even by 1 centimeter. "I don't know who you think you are," Min Seok began. "Kang Do-hyun," the man said simply. The name meant nothing to Nia. She watched it land on Min Seok's face, and watched Min Seok's face do something she had never seen it do in 6 years of marriage. Something she didn't have a precise word for. A kind of rapid, involuntary reassessment. The expression of a person who has just realized the room they walked into is shaped very differently from the room they imagined. Min Seok sat back down. Not because he wanted to, because his legs made the decision before his pride could intervene. He started. "The woman sitting across from you," Do-hyun said, "is going to finish her coffee. Then she's going to speak with her mediator and sign whatever papers reflect what was legally agreed upon. And you are going to facilitate that process in the most cooperative manner you're capable of." He paused. "Do you have questions about any part of that?" Min Seok said nothing. Nia had been sitting very still through all of this, the way she had learned to sit still when the air in a room changed, a survival habit from 6 years of reading temperature. She was aware that something was happening that she didn't fully understand, that the name this man had given meant something to Min Seok that it didn't mean to her yet, and that the outcome of the last 3 minutes had swung in a direction she had not predicted when she walked into this cafe. Min Seok stood again, more carefully this time. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He did not look at Nia. He did not look at Do-hyun. He looked at the middle distance between them, the way people look when they're recalibrating, and then he walked toward the door without another word. The cafe continued around them. The barista was still moving. Nia became aware that she was gripping the edge of the table with both hands. She released it, looked at her wrist, which had already begun to model faintly with the specific pattern of someone else's fingers. The man at the next table, Kang Do-hyun, did not immediately speak. He finished looking at the window. Then he turned to her with the same measured unhurriedness he had turned on Min Seok, and the quality of it was different enough that she was able to breathe again. "You speak Korean," she said. Her voice came out raw. "I do." "He thought I didn't. He always thought I didn't understand enough." "Yes," Do-hyun said. "I noticed he was careful to keep it below conversational volume." She looked at him for a long moment. She was a woman who had learned to read rooms the hard way, learned which exits were real, which silences were dangerous, which offers came with prices that wouldn't be named until after you'd already accepted. She read this man now with everything she had. "Why did you step in?" she said. He considered the question with what appeared to be genuine seriousness, as if it deserved more than a reflex answer. "I was sitting close enough to hear something that shouldn't be ignored," he said. "That's the simplest version." "What's the complicated version?" "There isn't one yet," he said. "Just the simple one." She almost laughed. The laugh didn't quite make it out, caught somewhere in her sternum between the afternoon's fear and the strange, absurd relief of sitting in a soul cafe asking this question to the stranger. He meant it, she said. What he said. He talks like that because it works. Because it's always worked. She paused. Or it did? I know, Do-hyun said. You know. I know what men like that mean when they speak that way. They're not posturing. They're announcing intentions they've already partially arranged. He looked at her steadily. Which is why I said what I said. She looked at her hands. The bruising on her wrist was more visible now. He's been doing this for 4 years, she said, and she wasn't sure why she told a stranger that. Maybe because the stranger had just stepped between her and the worst minute she'd had in months, and something about that rearranged the normal rules of disclosure. Not always the threats, but the erosion, you know? You stop being able to remember what you were like before someone spent 4 years telling you what you were. Do-hyun said nothing for a moment. Yes, he said finally. I've seen that. She looked up. You have a bruise forming, he said, nodding toward her wrist. You should have that documented today, before it fades. Your attorney should know. It was such a practical thing to say. After everything, such a grounded, useful, non-dramatic piece of advice that it cut through the remaining fog in her head more effectively than anything theatrical could have. Okay, she said. There's one other thing, he said. She waited. I have a property, he said. A house. Historically significant. It's been in the same family for over 2 centuries. I recently acquired it, and it requires significant interior restoration. I've been looking for the right designer. He reached into his jacket and produced a card, which he placed on the table between them without sliding it toward her, simply leaving it as a thing she could choose to pick up or not. I don't offer this because you appear to need rescuing. I offer it because I've seen your firm's portfolio. You have an office on Bukchon Row. The limb renovation last year was yours. Nia stared at him. You knew who I was, she said slowly. Before this. I knew your work, he said. I didn't arrange the rest of this. A brief pause, and something almost dry moved across his expression. I promise you that. She believed him, which surprised her, because she had not believed much of anything from any man in years. She picked up the card. Kang Do-hyun. No title, no company name, just a number. There's one more thing, he said. And I say this not to alarm you, but because you should know. He met her eyes directly, and there was no performance in it, no softening for effect. Don't go back to your apartment tonight. The air shifted again. What? He mentioned specific locations, Do-hyun said. Your parking structure. He had that detail. That means someone has been providing him with your schedule. Tonight, don't go where he expects you to be. The cold came back through her chest, but this time it was different. Not the paralytic cold of the past 2 hours, but the cold of clarity, of suddenly understanding the exact shape of the danger she had been living inside. Where am I supposed to go? She said. Somewhere he doesn't know, Do-hyun said. A hotel if you have one you've never used. A friend he doesn't know about. He stood, buttoning his jacket with the same unhurried precision that characterized everything else he did. This is not a permanent situation, but tonight, change the pattern. He dropped a bill on the table for his coffee. Take care of your wrist, he said, and call your attorney before 4 o'clock. Then he walked out. Nia sat alone in the cafe. The couple by the window was still laughing about the same thing on their phone. The barista was still moving behind the counter. She looked at the card in her hand. She thought about the way Min-suk had sat back down. Not because he was asked, not because he was threatened, because a man had said a name, 2 syllables, and something in Min-seok's body had responded before his brain could stop it. She'd been married to Han Min-seok for 6 years. She had never once seen him flinch. She turned the card over, blank on the back. Her coffee had gone cold. She sat with it for another minute, the way you sit after the adrenaline is done, and the body is trying to reassemble itself around the new information it's been given, and then she picked up her phone and called her attorney and told her to document the bruise. She did not go back to her apartment that night. She booked a hotel she'd never stayed in before. paid cash from the emergency account she'd opened 6 months ago in her name only, and sat on the edge of a narrow bed in a room on the 14th floor and looked out at the lights of Seoul spreading in every direction like something endless. She held the card between two fingers. Kang Do-hyun. She didn't know the name, but Min Seok had, and Min Seok had sat back down, and she was still alive and unbroken in a hotel room above a city that didn't know or care about her, which was the closest thing to safe she had felt in years. She put the card on the nightstand. In the morning, she thought. She'd decide in the morning. She lay back on the bed with her coat still on and looked at the ceiling and tried to remember what it had felt like to be 27 and choosing to move across the world for love, the exact texture of that particular confidence, the kind that doesn't know yet what it doesn't know. She couldn't quite reach it anymore, but something else had moved into that space, something quieter and less romantic and maybe more durable. She closed her eyes. Outside, Seoul continued as Seoul does, without pause, without sentiment, without interest in any single person's breaking point or survival. The city was just the city. It didn't care. She was the one who had to decide what she did with still being here. The card was still on the nightstand when she woke up. She hadn't moved it, hadn't turned it face down or slipped it into her bag, or done any of the things a sensible person might do with a stranger's contact information after the strangest afternoon of her adult life. It was just there, white against the dark wood laminate, the name printed in a font that was plain to the point of being a statement, Kang Do-hyun, and a number, and nothing else. Nia lay on her back for 4 minutes before sitting up. She knew it was 4 minutes because she watched the clock on the microwave in the kitchenette across the room, one of those institutional clocks that blinks the wrong time after a power flicker and nobody ever bothers to fix. It read 6:47 and she was fairly certain that was wrong, but the light coming through the curtain gap said early morning regardless, that specific gray gold that Seoul does in autumn when the air is cold and the city is only just beginning to reload itself. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her wrist. The bruising had deepened overnight the way bruising does. What had been a faint mottling at 4 in the afternoon was now a distinct pattern. 4 fingers and a thumb rendered in plum and yellow-green against her brown skin. She pressed it once, lightly, with 2 fingers. It hurt the way a bruise hurts, solid and specific. She photographed it with her phone, sent the image to her attorney with a timestamp and a single line. Before it fades further, keep this. Then she sat with the phone in her hand for a moment, not looking at it. Her mother used to say that the worst thing a smart woman could do was make decisions in the first hour after surviving something. You need to eat first, her mother said. You need to drink some water and put some food in your body and let your nervous system settle down before you trust a single thought in your head. Her mother had been a practical woman. Most of the most important things Nia knew had come packaged in that particular plain-spoken practicality, delivered over kitchen tables and car rides, and the particular background noise of a household that had never had quite enough money but had always had quite enough sense. She ordered room service, ate half of it standing by the window, watching the street below where the first delivery trucks were making their rounds, and a woman in a yellow coat was arguing with someone on her phone with the specific energy of someone who has been waiting for this argument since the night before. Then she picked up the card. The call rang twice. Ms. Brooks? Not a question. He had her number then, or had been expecting the call from an unknown number at this hour. Either way, he didn't sound like a man who had been asleep. It's early, she said. It is. I wanted to ask you something before I talked myself out of it. A brief pause. All right. The property you mentioned, the renovation commission. She looked at the street below. You said you'd seen the Lim project. That's not a project I've published. It's not in my public portfolio. Silence. So either you have access to client referrals I'm not aware of, she said, or you researched me specifically before yesterday, and I need to know which one it is before I walk into a building with you. The pause this time was longer. When he spoke, his voice had not changed in quality, still that same measured register. But something in it was more direct, the way a person sounds when they've decided to drop a layer of social scaffolding. I had your firm flagged 8 weeks ago, he said. I was given 3 names by an architectural preservation consultant I trust. Yours was the one that handled restoration work with the most precision and the least ego about the original structure. A beat. I had not yet made contact. Yesterday was not orchestrated. She believed him again, which still surprised her. Why didn't you just say that yesterday? You'd just been threatened by your ex-husband in a public cafe, he said. I didn't think a full professional disclosure was the correct priority. She almost said something and stopped. Fair, she said instead. Would you like to see the property? She looked at the bruise on her wrist. Yes, she said. The address he sent was in Unpyeong-gu, in the northern part of the city where the hills fold up against each other, and the older neighborhoods still have the original street geometry, narrow, irregular, laid out by feet and carts rather than urban planners. She took a taxi rather than her own car, which she had not retrieved from the parking garage, and was not going to retrieve until she had spoken again with her attorney about exactly how specific Min Seok's surveillance of her routine had become. The house sat at the end of a lane that had no signage. It was large in the way that very old Korean houses are large, not vertically, not ostentatiously, but spread across the land with a kind of horizontal confidence, as if it had long ago decided that it intended to stay and had settled its weight accordingly. The outer wall was traditional stone, the kind of pale gray that weathers unevenly and shows its age in layers. One section near the eastern corner had partially collapsed and been braced with timber, recent work, rough. Do-hyun was already there, standing just inside the main gate with a man Nia would later learn was his building manager, a compact, weathered figure named Seo, who communicated almost exclusively in head movements and single syllables. Do-hyun was not dressed differently from the day before. Another dark suit, different in cut but identical in its refusal to announce itself. He looked at her wrist without commenting on it. She noticed him notice it. The main hall is structurally sound, he said, moving directly into information the way she'd already identified as his default mode. The east wing is not. Two of the original support beams have significant rot. The west garden wall has subsided. The ondol system throughout is non-functional and would need to be assessed for whether it can be restored or needs to be replaced entirely. How long has it been empty? 11 years. The family that owned it before had a succession dispute. It went through 3 attorneys and 2 court proceedings before the estate was finally settled. He paused by a doorway and looked through it into a room where pale winter light came through paper screens that had been patched in several places with tape, which struck Nia as both deeply sad and somehow endearing. I acquired it 4 months ago. She walked into the room. The floor was original wood, dark with age, and in the far corner someone had left a ceramic pot that had cracked through the middle and been left where it fell. The walls had been plastered at some point in the last century, and the plaster had separated from the original material beneath, bubbling in long arcs that caught the light. She stood in the center of the room and turned slowly. Her chest did something that it hadn't done in a long time. That particular involuntary response that she had never found a better word for than recognition. The feeling that a space is speaking to you in a frequency you already know. This is extraordinary, she said quietly. And then, because she had learned to be suspicious of her own enthusiasms, it's also going to take a long time and cost more than you're probably expecting. I'm expecting it to be expensive, Do-hyun said from the doorway. I'm not naive about the scope. People always say that, she said, and then they flinch when you show them the actual numbers. Show me the actual numbers, he said. We'll see if I flinch. She turned and looked at him across the room. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms loosely crossed, and the light from the patched paper screen caught the side of his face at an angle that made him look very briefly like a person, rather than whatever composed, controlled impression he otherwise projected. Why this house? She said. Specifically. Something moved behind his expression. It belonged to a family I had reason to know, he said. A long time ago. I have no sentimental claim on it, but I know its history, and I'd rather it be restored than demolished for condominiums. It was not a full answer. She knew that. She also knew, from reading rooms and reading people across a decade of professional life and 6 years of marital survival, that it was the most honest, partial answer she was likely to get today, and that pushing harder would close a door rather than open one. I'll need 3 days to do a proper assessment, she said. Every room, the garden structures, the roof situation. After that, I can give you a phased proposal. I'll have Seo give you full access. I'll need to bring my own structural engineer for the East Wing evaluation. Of course. She nodded once, looked back at the room, the cracked pot in the corner, the tape on the paper screens. The tape has to go, she said. He looked where she was looking. Obviously, he said, and something in his voice was almost amused, the way very controlled people allow themselves to be almost amused as the outer edge of what they'll permit. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Her attorney. Call me when you can. Not urgent, but today. She looked up. I need to make a call. Use the garden, Do-hyun said. The signal is better there than anywhere in the main structure. She went to the garden while he and Seo conferred over something near the East Wing. The garden was in the particular state of formal abandonment, the bones of an original design still visible in the placement of stones, and the stumps of shaped hedges, overlaid with 11 years of enthusiastic, uncontrolled growth. A persimmon tree near the south wall had dropped most of its fruit, which had fermented on the ground and filled the cold air with something sweet and slightly rotten. Her attorney, Yoon Ji-ae, answered on the first ring. The photograph is excellent, Yoon said, better than I expected given the timeline. He grabbed me in a cafe, Nia said, in front of other people. Did anyone document it? She thought of Do-hyun's voice, the way he had repeated Min-seok's threats, precise and level, back across a cafe table. There was a witness, she said, to the threats as well. The grab was visible to anyone who looked. The threats. Yoon's voice sharpened. What exactly? Nia told her. All of it. The career interference, the car, the implication of hired people for problems he didn't want to handle personally. She heard Yoon write without pause through all of it. He said this in Korean? Yoon asked. Yes. He thought I didn't understand enough to follow it. And the witness? They heard it in Korean. Yes. Are they willing to provide a statement? Nia looked across the garden to where Do-hyun had crouched beside the east wall to look at something near the foundation, his suit jacket apparently irrelevant to him as a concern. Seo stood behind him, hands in pockets, watching with the expression of a man who has seen many things and assessed them all and found most of them unsurprising. I'll ask, she said. Nia. Yoon's voice had changed register, dropped into something more personal. What he described, the brake lines, the people he uses, that's not posturing. That reads as a pattern of specific planning. I know. You need to not be predictable right now. Routine, schedule, location. I slept in a hotel last night, Nia said. I didn't go home. A brief pause from Yoon. Good. Someone told me to, she said, which was not something she had intended to disclose. Who? She watched Do-hyun stand, dust his hands against each other, and say something to Seo in an undertone. Someone who knows things, she said. I'll explain later. After she hung up, she stood in the abandoned garden for another minute. The persimmon smell was heavy and sweet. A crow landed on the south wall, looked at her without concern, and left. She went back inside. I need to ask you something, she said, finding Do-hyun in the main corridor. You need a formal statement, he said before she could finish. She stopped. Yes. About what you witnessed in the cafe, he said, not a question. My attorney thinks the threats constitute grounds for... I know what they constitute. He looked at her without expression, and then with the same quality of decision she'd seen when he'd first spoken across the cafe, he said, I'll provide a statement. She hadn't expected that. Or maybe she had, which was its own unsettling thing. That's... Thank you. Don't thank me, he said, not unkindly. It's a factual account of what I observed. That's all it is. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Yoon. It was a number she didn't recognize. Korean prefix, no contact name. She stared at it for a moment before answering. Silence on the line. Then, you think he can protect you? Min-seok's voice, stripped of even the pretense of conversational register it had carried in the cafe. Something underneath it now, something that had burned away the performance. Her jaw tightened. Don't call me. You know what he is, Min-seok said. You know what kind of man gets that kind of... A pause, as if he was choosing a word with some care. Reputation. And you want to tell me that's better than what we had? We didn't have anything, she said. You took things. That's different. You're making this very stupid, Nia. I'm going to hang up now. The inheritance is mine. His voice was very quiet now, the way it always got when he had moved past anger into something colder. You know that. You know what that money came from, and you know your name on those documents doesn't change that. My grandmother left that money to me, she said, and her voice cracked on the word grandmother without her permission, and she hated herself briefly for it. Her name is on those documents too. Your grandmother is dead, he said, and decisions she made don't account for circumstances she didn't know about. Do-hyun was watching her from 6 feet away. He had not moved since she'd answered the phone. She turned slightly away and lowered her voice. This conversation is being documented, she said. You called my cell from a number I don't have saved. That call record, nobody cares about call records, Min-suk said. You know what your new friend's organization has done to people who got in the way of things they cared about? You want to be near that? You want to be inside that? When it comes apart, and it will come apart, those things always do. You want to be standing next to him when it does? She didn't answer. Think about what you're doing, he said. There's still a version of this that ends quietly. You sign the inheritance transfer, I file the divorce as uncontested, you take your little design business and go back to Atlanta, and that's it. Clean. Done. I'm not going back to Atlanta, she said. Then Seoul is going to be very uncomfortable for you. Goodbye, Min-seok. She ended the call, stood with the phone in her hand, not moving. He called you, Do-hyun said. Not a question. She turned. He says I should think about who I'm choosing to be near. She met Do-hyun's eyes directly. He implied that when your organization comes apart, I'll be collateral. Something happened in Do-hyun's face. Not anger. She thought it might actually be something closer to respect, the look a person gets when they find out someone is sharper than anticipated. He's not entirely wrong, Do-hyun said, about what I am. The sentence landed in the cold corridor with all the weight of something that had been chosen very deliberately. She looked at him. He's not wrong, she said. About the nature of my organization. No. He held her gaze with the same steadiness that had characterized him from the first moment in the café. I think you knew that when you called me this morning. I think you've been making inferences since yesterday afternoon. She had. She wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Say it plainly, she said. I run organizations that operate outside legal frameworks, he said, across several industries and several countries. What I do and what I am are not things that exist in any registry or any courtroom. A pause. What I told you yesterday about your ex-husband's intentions was accurate. The offer about the property is genuine, and what I am is not hidden from you. The corridor was cold. Somewhere in the east wing, something creaked. The old house settling, or the wind finding a gap in the compromised structure. She thought about her mother, about the very plain, very practical woman who had raised her to think before she trusted and trust before she acted and act before she froze. She thought about Min Seok's voice on the phone, stripped down to its actual content. Sign the inheritance over. Go back to Atlanta. She thought about the room with the cracked pot and the taped paper screens and the feeling in her chest that had said recognition. The 3-day assessment, she said. I want to start tomorrow. Do-hyun looked at her for a moment. All right, he said, and I need to know whether the east wing stabilization can be handled by a contractor I specify, or whether you need to use someone internal. Whoever you specify, he said, this is your project. It's your property, which I am hiring you to restore, he said. The decisions are yours. She nodded, looked at the corridor around them. The original wooden ceiling beams, the walls that had been painted over in some ill-advised renovation decades ago, the ghost of the original floor plan visible in darker rectangles, where furniture had sat for years. I need somewhere to sleep tonight, she said. It cost her something to say it that directly. Do-hyun didn't change expression. There's a residence attached to the property, he said, a smaller structure in the northwest corner of the grounds. It was the original caretaker's quarters. It's habitable. I had it cleaned and heated last month. You can use it for as long as the project requires. I'm not asking for charity. I know that, he said. I'm offering functional accommodation to the person I've hired to work on my property. That's a normal arrangement. She almost argued. She could feel the argument ready to go. The specific reflexive resistance of a woman who had spent years having her independence treated as a problem to be managed, who had learned that accepting help was often the first step in a sequence that ended with someone else making her choices. But she was standing in a cold corridor in a house that needed saving, and her ex-husband had just called her to tell her that Seoul was going to be uncomfortable, and the apartment she paid $3,000 a month for was a place she could not go tonight. The caretaker's quarters, she said. I want to see them before I agree. Of course, he said. They were small and clean and smelled like cedar and old stone, and the window looked out at a corner of the garden where the persimmon tree stood bare against the early afternoon sky. And she stood in the middle of the single room for 30 seconds and said, "Fine." She went back to the hotel to collect her things. She was there for 40 minutes. When she came out of the elevator into the lobby, a man she didn't recognize was sitting in a chair near the entrance reading a magazine in the specific way of someone who is not reading a magazine. She walked past him and out onto the street and flagged a taxi and didn't let herself look back. But she had seen his shoes, the particular quality of them, the specific kind of unremarkable that is its own advertisement. And she knew with the instinctive literacy of a woman who had learned to read threat environments by necessity that Min-seok had been faster than she expected. She called Do-hyun from the taxi. "There was a man in my hotel lobby," she said. A silence of about 2 seconds. "What hotel?" She told him. "Don't stop anywhere between there and the property," he said. "Tell the driver to take you directly." Another pause, shorter. "I'm handling this." "What does that mean?" "It means you should arrive in approximately 20 minutes and I'll be at the gate," he said. "And it means that your ex-husband has made a decision today that has consequences he hasn't finished calculating yet." The taxi moved through Seoul's afternoon traffic. She watched the city outside the window, the compressed vertical landscape of it, the way one block could contain a century of different architectural decisions all pressed against each other without apology. She kept her bag on her lap. Her hands were steady. She was 34 years old and she was riding toward a crime lord's property because her ex-husband had put someone in her hotel lobby. And the strangest part of it, the thing she kept circling, was that she was not as afraid as she had been yesterday afternoon in the café. Whether that was because she was safer or because she had simply moved past a threshold where fear felt useful, she didn't know. The taxi turned north. Outside, the city continued its work, indifferent and enormous, and somewhere inside it, Han Min-seok was making the next calculation in a sequence he believed he controlled, not yet knowing that the man he'd flinched from in a café had already picked up his phone, and that the calculation was no longer his to make. Do-hyun was at the gate when the taxi pulled up, not waiting in the way people wait, shifting weight, checking phones, manufacturing patience. He was simply there, standing at the edge of the stone entrance with his hands at his sides, and his attention already on the taxi before it had fully stopped, which told her that someone had been watching for it. She got out. He looked at her face, then at the bag on her shoulder, then at her face again. "Anyone follow the taxi?" he said. "I don't know. I didn't see anyone." "We did," he said, and moved toward the gate. "Come inside." She followed him through the gate and into the main courtyard, where two men she hadn't seen on her earlier visit were positioned near the east wall with the particular stillness of people who are professionally still. They didn't look at her. They looked at the perimeter. "Who are they?" she said. "Mine," Do-hyun said simply, and she accepted that the way you accept weather, not because you've agreed with it, but because arguing with it would be a waste of resources she needed for other things. He took her to the caretaker's quarters himself. The room was warmer than the main house. Someone had turned the heat on in the hours since she'd agreed to stay, and there was a folding table against one wall with a kettle and 2 cups that had not been there before. "Someone came in here," she said. "Seo, he brought the kettle." Do-hyun looked at the table. "He does that. It's how he expresses concern." She set her bag on the floor and stood in the middle of the room and looked at the window. Outside, the persimmon tree was beginning to lose the last of its color in the fading afternoon. "The man in the lobby," she said. Did you find out who he was? He's employed by a private investigation firm that Min Seok has used before, Do-hyun said. The firm is registered in Incheon. They do surveillance, document retrieval, occasionally things that aren't cataloged in their official service menu. She turned. How do you know that already? He held her gaze. Because I asked someone to find out, he said. And when I ask, the answer usually arrives quickly. She absorbed that, filed it in the place where she was keeping all the information about exactly who she had walked toward, the folder that was getting thicker each hour and that she hadn't yet decided what to do with. He's escalating, she said. Min Seok. He knows that the divorce hearing is in 3 weeks, and he's trying to change the terms of what I'm willing to accept before we get there. Yes. That's what the lobby was. He's not trying to hurt me yet. He's trying to make me feel surrounded. Do-hyun looked at her with something that was not quite surprise, but was adjacent to it, the expression of a person recalibrating an estimate upward. That's accurate, he said. I've been married to him for 6 years, she said. I know his playbook. She sat down on the edge of the narrow bed, suddenly aware of the weight in her legs. The particular exhaustion that comes not from physical effort, but from sustained alertness. What I don't know is how far he'll take it before the hearing. I have people monitoring his communications, Do-hyun said. She looked up. When? She said. Since yesterday evening. She held his gaze for a moment, trying to measure the things she was feeling. It was not quite comfort, not quite alarm, something that existed in the space between being protected and being watched by the person doing the protecting, and she was not sure the distinction mattered as much as it should have. All right, she said. I'll tell you what I find, he said. I'm not going to withhold information from you about your own situation. That's a very specific promise. I'm aware of that, he said, and left her to settle in. The first week in the mansion passed in the particular rhythm that comes with deep work, the kind that fills the head completely and leaves no room for anything that isn't the immediate problem. Nia moved through the house room by room with her notebook and her camera and her measuring tape, cataloging damage and possibility in the same breath. The way restoration work requires you to hold both simultaneously without letting one cancel the other. The east wing was worse than Do-hyun had described. 2 of the support beams were not just rotted, but had been colonized by something that had been working through the wood for years with patient efficiency. She stood under them with her structural engineer, a meticulous woman named Baek, who had the quality of someone who had personally witnessed enough building failures to be unsentimental about timber, and they looked at each other above the damage and had the conversation about costs that Nia had warned Do-hyun would be uncomfortable. She brought the revised numbers to him that evening in the room he'd converted into a temporary office, a spare, functional space where the original walls showed through gaps in the later plasterwork like a stratigraphy of the house's history. He looked at the figure at the bottom of her assessment sheet for a moment. All right, he said. She waited. That's it? She said. Just all right? You told me you'd show me the real numbers to see if I flinched, he said. I'm not flinching. Most clients flinch at half that number. I'm not most clients, he said, in a tone that was not boastful, simply declarative, and she was irritated to find it accurate. They had dinner most evenings in whatever room she'd been working in that day, an arrangement that developed without either of them formally proposing it. Seo would appear with food from somewhere. She never tracked where exactly. And they would eat surrounded by the active evidence of the house's renovation, plaster samples and tile fragments, and her annotated photographs spread across whatever surface was available. He asked questions. Not the social, conversational questions that people ask to fill space. He asked about the work specifically, about why she made the choices she made, about what the original design intent had been and how she was reading it from the remaining evidence. He listened to the answers with the quality of attention that she had, by this point in her adult life, learned to identify as genuinely rare, not waiting for his turn to speak, not filtering what she said through a pre-existing framework, actually receiving it. She found herself talking about her grandmother, not about the inheritance, not the legal fact of it that Min-suk wanted to reclaim, but about the woman herself. Ida Brooks, who had come to Atlanta from rural Georgia with $40 and a set of opinions about the proper way to keep a house that she had applied with religious consistency for 84 years, who had taught a young Nia that every room told a story about the people who had lived in it, and that the job of anyone who touched a room was to listen to that story before they changed anything. Do-hyun listened to all of this. He didn't comment sentimentally. At the end, he said, "She sounds like someone who understood that objects hold information." "That's exactly what she used to say," Nia said. "Different words, same idea." He nodded once, looked at the wall in front of them where she'd stripped a section of paint to expose the original plaster surface beneath, an ochre gold that would have made the room warm in candlelight. "This house was built by a man named Kang Dae-won," Do-hyun said after a pause. 1791. He built it for his wife, who was from a family that didn't approve of the match. She had grown up in a larger house. He built this one to be not larger, but more considered. Every room was designed around something she had specifically said she loved. The northern light in winter, the sound of water from the well through open screens, the shape of the persimmon tree in autumn. Nia looked at him. "He's your ancestor," she said. 7 generations back," he said, "on my father's side." "You said you had no sentimental claim on this house." He looked at the exposed plaster. "I said that. It wasn't entirely accurate." She held that for a moment. The fire in the portable heater they'd set up made a small, regular sound in the silence. "Why tell me now?" she said. "Because you told me about your grandmother," he said, "and it seemed like the appropriate exchange." 12 days into the project, she found the room. It was behind a door she'd initially cataloged as a closet or storage space in the northeastern corner of the main building. The door was narrow and had been painted over so many times it had sealed partially into the frame. She worked it open with a flat pry tool, and the smell that came out was not dust, but something older, drier, the smell of air that had been sitting with particular objects for a very long time. She got the door fully open and stood in the doorway. It was a study, original, untouched, not by neglect, but by what looked like intentional preservation. The shelves along 2 walls held books in both Korean and Chinese, their spines faded to a uniform paleness. The desk in the center was small and plain and had an inkstone on it that was still faintly marked with residue. The room's single window was shuttered, and when she crossed to it and turned the latch and pushed it open, she was looking directly into the northwest corner of the garden where the persimmon tree stood. Her hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, from the particular response she had when the work delivered something beyond what she'd been looking for. She photographed everything before she touched anything. Spent 40 minutes in the room with just her camera and her notebook, moving slowly, reading what the space had to say in the way her grandmother had taught her. She told Do-hyun at dinner. She watched his face do the thing it almost never did, lose its composure entirely for about 3 seconds. He set his chopsticks down. "Show me," he said. She took him there. He stood in the doorway of the room his ancestor had built and looked at the desk with the inkstone on it and the books on the shelves, and she watched something move through him that was too large and too personal for her to catalog, and so she stepped back and let him have it. He stood there for a long time. When he turned around, his face was reassembled, but not quite to the same configuration as before. "Leave this room last," he said. "Whatever the sequence is. This room last." "Yes," she said. 2 days after the study, her phone showed a notification at 2 in the morning that woke her from the first deep sleep she'd managed in weeks. It was from Yoon. "Call me. Urgent." She called from the bed, sitting up in the dark with the cold air of the room around her. The persimmon tree was a black shape against a dark blue sky through the window. "He filed an injunction," Yoon said. There was no preamble, no cushioning. Yoon was a woman who delivered information like a surgeon delivered diagnoses. Cleanly, without apology for the pain. An emergency injunction with the Seoul Family Court. He's claiming that you are currently residing with a known criminal figure and that this constitutes willful exposure of yourself to criminal enterprise, which he is arguing violates the terms of the divorce settlement's conduct provisions. Nia said nothing for a moment. "There are no conduct provisions in our settlement," she said. "We never agreed to any." "He has filed documentation claiming there are," Yoon said, "with what appears to be a signed addendum to the original settlement agreement." The cold in Nia's chest was not the cold of fear this time. It was something more specific, more focused. That addendum doesn't exist, she said. I know that. I signed nothing with conduct provisions. I know that too, Yoon said, but the document that has been filed has what appears to be your signature on it, and the court has accepted it for preliminary review. And the injunction it supports is asking the court to void the entire settlement and restart proceedings from the beginning. Nia stood up. She didn't know why she stood up. There was nothing to stand up for in a dark room at 2 a.m, but she couldn't stay horizontal with this information in her body. He forged it, she said. That would be my assessment, yes. But assessment and proof are two different things, and right now the document is in front of a judge and it has your signature on it. The hearing is in 11 days. If the injunction is granted, Yoon said carefully, there will be no hearing in 11 days. The entire case restarts. The settlement framework we've built, the inheritance protection, the asset division, the protection order we were preparing to file, all of it goes back to zero. The persimmon tree outside the window was very still. No wind. How did he do it? Nia said. The signature. How did he forge something that would pass a preliminary review? Yoon was quiet for a moment. There are documents you signed during the early stages of the divorce proceedings. Pre-settlement documents, administrative items. I've been looking at the filed addendum, and the signature on it it's not a simple copy. It's extremely precise. Something tilted in Nia's understanding. He had someone inside the process, she said slowly. Yoon did not respond immediately, and the quality of that non-response said more than a quick denial would have. GA, Nia said, who had access to my signed documents. Your documents were in my office, in a physical file, and in our case management system, Yoon said. Access to the system it's a small practice, Nia, 3 attorneys and 2 paralegals. Someone in your practice gave him my signatures, Nia said. It was not a question. The silence on the line was 7 seconds long. She counted them. I've already begun an internal review, Yoon said. I'm not going to insult you by trying to make this sound less severe than it is. Nia sat on the floor. Not dramatically. Her legs just decided that the floor was where she needed to be, and she folded down to it and sat with her back against the bed in the dark. 6 years. And he had not stopped. She had done every correct thing. The attorney, the documentation, the injunction against his threats, the mediation, the settlement framework built over months. And he had gone inside the process and taken the weapon she'd built and turned it. What do I do? She said. Tomorrow morning, I need you in my office at 8 o'clock, Yoon said. We're going to need a handwriting expert, a forensic document examiner, and I'm going to need to talk to everyone who had any access to your files within the last, a pause, 6 months. And Nia, I need you to be somewhere verifiable tonight, documented, time-stamped somewhere that has your presence on record. I'm at the Kang property. Another silence. The property you're working on, Yoon said, the one the injunction is citing. Yes. You have documentation of your employment there? A contract, invoices, something formal? We shook hands, Nia said. She heard Yoon exhale. Get a contract signed in the morning, Yoon said. Date it accurately, before 8 a.m. if you can. After she hung up, she sat on the floor for a while. She thought about the lobby of the hotel, the man with the magazine, his particular shoes. How quickly that had moved, how Min Seok had known which hotel she'd gone to. Then something shifted in her chest. How had Min Seok known which hotel she'd gone to? She had booked it herself, on her phone, paid cash, told no one except she ran it back. Told no one. She'd called Yoon from the hotel room but not named it. She'd called Do Hyun in the morning but not from the hotel lobby, and she hadn't named it then either. She had texted the hotel address to Do Hyun's number. When he'd told her to go somewhere, Min Seok didn't know. She'd sent the address so his driver could have found her if needed. She got up from the floor. She stood in the center of the dark room for a long time. Then she went to find Do Hyun. The main house was not entirely dark. There was a light in the room he used as his office, visible through the gap at the bottom of the door. She knocked once. Come in. He was at the table with a laptop open and 2 phones beside him, and the look on his face when she entered told her immediately that he was not sleeping because he already knew something was wrong, which landed on her with a weight she wasn't entirely ready for. He filed an injunction, she said, using a forged document with my signature. Do-hyun's expression didn't change. He looked at her steadily. I know, he said. I was informed an hour ago. She looked at him. You know, she said. My people monitor his communications, he said. When he filed, I was notified. Why didn't you wake me? Because there was nothing actionable at 2 a.m, he said. And you were sleeping for the first time in days. She looked at him, and the look cost her something. Some last remaining reserve of the patience she'd been carefully managing since the hotel lobby, since the call from Yoon, since sitting on the floor in the dark, running the geography of betrayal backward through the last 2 weeks. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer me without managing the question. Something shifted in his posture, barely visible, a kind of bracing. How did Min-seok know which hotel I was in, she said. I booked it myself. I paid cash. The only person I sent that address to was you. The room was very quiet. Do-hyun looked at her for a long moment. And what she was looking for was the specific tell of a controlled person trying to construct an answer rather than retrieve one. She'd spent 6 years learning what that looked like. She didn't see it. What she saw instead was something more complicated and, in its own way, more difficult. I didn't give him your hotel address, he said, but someone in my organization did. She stopped. What? I sent your hotel location to my head of security, he said, so she could position someone nearby in case Min-seok's investigator moved to something more direct than lobby surveillance. She is one of 3 people in my organization who knew where you were. He looked at her with the same directness he had looked at Min-seok with across a cafe table. One of those 3 people has been passing information to Han Min-seok for approximately 3 weeks. I identified the source tonight. That's what I was sitting here doing. The floor felt different under her feet. Not literally. The wood was the same cold wood it had been, but in the way that floors feel different when the information in the room has changed the geometry of the space. Someone inside your organization, she said slowly, is working for my ex-husband. Was, Do-hyun said, past tense as of approximately 40 minutes ago. She didn't ask what past tense meant in this context. She had enough information about who he was to infer it, and she wasn't going to ask questions she didn't need the answers to. He knew where I was before I arrived at the property, she said. He knew I was here. That's why he had the hotel lobby covered so quickly. He wasn't following me, he was already watching the hotel because he already knew. Yes. Which means the injunction, the forged document, the timing of it. He's been planning this since before you walked into the cafe, Do-hyun said. The confrontation in the cafe was not spontaneous. He came there knowing you would be there, knowing what he intended to do. He wanted you frightened and isolated before the hearing so that you would accept worse terms. She stood with all of this for a moment. And then I walked toward you instead, she said. Yes. And that broke his timeline. Yes, he accelerated. The investigator in your lobby was faster than he'd planned. The forged document was filed earlier than he'd intended. He's improvising now against a situation he didn't anticipate. Do-hyun stood up from the table, which makes him more dangerous, not less. Improvising men make direct decisions. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she'd been afraid to for most of the last 2 weeks, with the full weight of what she knew and didn't know about him. Your person who was feeding him information, she said, did they know what he was planning to do? The break lines. The people he uses for problems. Do-hyun was very still. I don't know yet, he said. I will. If they did, she said, then Min-seok didn't just have a source inside your organization. He had someone who was willing to help him arrange what amounts to a murder. The words sat in the air between them. She had not said it before. She had thought it, in the cafe, in the hotel room, on the floor in the dark. But she had not said it aloud, and saying it changed its weight. Do-hyun looked at her with the expression of a man who has lived for a long time in rooms where that word was not remarkable, encountering it on the face of someone for whom it still cost something to say. Go get some sleep, he said quietly. Be in Yoon's office at 8. I'll have a formal employment contract for you to sign before you leave, accurately dated. A pause. And I'll have someone with you. I don't need Nia. He said her name, not her last name, her name, the first time he'd used it, and it landed with a precision that stopped her. He has a forged document with your signature and a judge reviewing it. He has someone watching your movements. He had a source inside my organization. He looked at her steadily. Let me put someone with you. She stood in the doorway of the cold office in the old house that she had spent 2 weeks learning to read, and felt the exact weight of everything that had been done to her, and everything she had not yet done back. Fine, she said. Someone with me. But they stay outside Yoon's office. What I say to my attorney is not something your people need to hear. Agreed, he said immediately. She turned to go. Nia? His voice stopped her again. She looked back. He was standing by the table with his hands at his sides and the laptop still open behind him, and he looked, for the first time since the café, for the first time in all the evenings in all the rooms of this house, like someone who was not entirely in control of the situation, and the humanity of that, the fact of it, hit her somewhere she hadn't expected. I'm sorry about my organization, he said. This came from inside what I'm responsible for. That matters to me. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said, and then, because it was true, and because she was exhausted, and because the room with the inkstone had happened, and she wasn't going to pretend it hadn't. I know it does. She went back to the caretaker's quarters. She did not sleep. She sat by the window and watched the persimmon tree until the sky behind it began its slow move from black to the specific dark blue that comes just before morning, when the city is as quiet as it ever gets, which in Seoul is not very quiet, but quiet enough. At 5:30, she stood up, washed her face, and looked at herself in the small mirror above the sink, and what looked back at her was not the woman who had sat frozen across from Min Sok in a cafe 2 weeks ago, not entirely. Something had changed in the geography of her face, some resolution of tension that had been there so long she had stopped seeing it, now visibly loosened. Not because things were better, they were objectively worse. A forged document and a corrupt insider and a man accelerating his timeline towards something that had the word murder at its center. But because she had stopped waiting for it to not be happening, it was happening, all of it, and she was going to have to become someone who could stand inside that without coming apart, or the next thing Min Suk did was going to find her already on the floor. She put her coat on. At 6:45, she knocked on the door of the main house, and Seo opened it, looked at her, and without a word turned and went to make something hot for her to drink. And she stood in the old corridor of the old house and waited for the day to begin. The contract was on the table when she came into the main house at 7:10. Do-hyun had not slept. She could see it in the particular quality of his stillness, not the composed stillness of a rested person, but the locked-down stillness of someone who has been running on controlled tension for hours and has stopped registering it as unusual. There were 2 phones on the table beside the contract, and both of them had been used recently, screens still lit. She picked up the contract. Read it. It was thorough. Scope of work, timeline, compensation, a clause about her creative authority over all restoration decisions that she had not asked for, and that he had included anyway. The date on it was today's date. She signed it, slid it back across the table. "Who's coming with me?" she said. "Park." He nodded toward the doorway where a man she'd seen once before near the east wall was standing with his jacket on and his hands loose at his sides. Medium height, unremarkable face, the kind of person a room forgets immediately. "He'll stay outside." "I know," she said. "We agreed." She took a taxi to Yoon's office with Park in a separate car behind her, visible in the rear window at a consistent 2-car distance. She watched him in the glass and thought about the 11 days until the hearing and what 11 days meant now, with a forged document in front of a judge and a source extracted from Do-hyun's organization and Min Seok accelerating towards something that didn't have a clean name yet. Yoon's office was on the 6th floor of a building in Seocho-gu, the kind of neighborhood that had made peace with itself. Old law offices and small restaurants and a dry cleaner that had been in the same spot since before anyone currently using it had been born. Yoon was already at her desk when Nia arrived, which meant she had also not slept, or had slept in the office, or some version of both. On the desk was a printout of the filed injunction, and beside it a physical document in a clear sleeve, the alleged addendum with Nia's forged signature. Yoon looked at her. "Sit down." Nia sat. Yoon slid the sleeved document across. Nia looked at the signature, looked at it for a long time. It was very good. It was not a copy. Min-seok had been right that simple copies don't hold up. It was a reconstruction, someone who had studied the way she formed letters and reproduced the movement rather than the image. The slight leftward lean on the capital N, the way the terminal stroke on the S of Brooks extended and curled back, the pressure variation. "I sign my name the same way every time," she said quietly. "Most people do," Yoon said. "That's what makes it possible." "Who in your office?" Nia said. She looked up from the document. "You said you'd begun a review. What did you find?" Yoon's face did something tight and controlled. "One of my paralegals. He's been with the practice for 2 years. I've had him suspended pending a full investigation, and I filed a report with the Bar Association." "How much did he give Min-seok?" "I don't know the full scope yet. What I do know is that he had access to all your signed pre-settlement documents, and that he and someone in Min-seok's circle have been in contact for at least 8 weeks. 8 weeks? Before the Café, before any of this had surfaced into visible confrontation. Min-seok had been building this for 8 weeks while she had been building a settlement case she thought was airtight. "The injunction hearing is in 4 days," Yoon said. Not 11. The judge has agreed to hear arguments on the injunction on an expedited basis because Min-seok's filing cited imminent harm to settlement proceedings. 4 days, Nia said. "Yes. What do we need?" Yoon straightened the documents in front of her with both hands, a precise, deliberate motion. "A forensic handwriting expert. I have one, Dr. Choi. She's testified in 40-plus cases, and the courts know her work. She can examine the original filing and give a technical opinion on the forgery. I've already called her this morning, and she can begin today if we get authorization from the court to examine the original document." "Can we get that authorization?" "I've filed for it. We'll know by noon." Yoon paused. "The other thing we need is a witness statement, the man from the Café, the witness to Min-seok's verbal threats. If he provides a formal statement, it establishes a pattern of deliberate intimidation and potential criminal planning, which changes the context for the judge reviewing the injunction." "He said he'd provide one," Nia said. "I need it in writing, and I need it in the next 48 hours. Nia nodded, took out her phone, and sent a text to Do-hyun's number. "Statement. Attorney needs it written, 48 hours. She watched the screen for a moment. The reply came in under 30 seconds. Already drafted. Sender contact. She showed the screen to Yoon. Yoon looked at the response time. Looked at Nia. Said nothing about what she was thinking, which Nia appreciated. "There's one more thing," Yoon said, and her voice had shifted register slightly, the way it did when she was moving from strategic to personal. "The injunction's central claim, that you are voluntarily residing with a known criminal figure, is going to be examined by the judge. I need to know what your answer to that is." "I'm employed to restore a historically significant property," Nia said. "I have a contract dated today, signed by both parties, with a professional scope of work." "And the residence arrangement?" "Standard accommodation for an on-site restoration project." "That's the professional answer," Yoon said. "The judge may ask about the personal dimension." Nia looked at the window. Outside, Seoul was doing its ordinary morning business. Taxis and delivery trucks, and a woman walking a very small dog with enormous conviction. "The personal dimension is that I am a woman whose ex-husband has forged documents and placed surveillance on her movements," Nia said. "I'm staying somewhere he cannot immediately access. That's not an association with criminal enterprise, that's threat response." Yoon studied her. "That's a good answer." "It's also true," Nia said. She was back at the property by noon. Do-hyun was not there. Seo, when she asked, indicated with the minimum possible syllables that he had gone out and would return by evening. She did not ask where. She went to work instead. She had not stopped work, not for any of this, because the house needed her, and because the work was the one place where the chaos outside had no jurisdiction. She spent the afternoon in the West Wing, where the garden wall subsidence had compromised the interior of the corner room. The plaster there had cracked in long diagonal lines from the compromised foundation, and behind the cracked plaster she found something she had not expected. The original wall surface, unplastered, with ink markings that appeared to be a child's handwriting, perhaps a century old or more, names and a date, and what looked like a height measurement. She sat back on her heels and looked at it for a long time. She photographed it, noted it in her preservation log. She would show Do-hyun when he returned. Her phone rang at 3 in the afternoon. Number she didn't know. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. Miss Brooks? A man's voice, Korean accent, English words, a particular quality of deliberateness that was not the same deliberateness as Do-hyun. Something thinner in it, more constructed. My name is not important. I'm calling on behalf of someone who would like to resolve the current situation without further inconvenience to either party. She stood up from the floor. Who are you calling on behalf of? She said. Not a question, a demand. Someone who has significant interest in the outcome of your divorce proceedings, the voice said, and who believes a direct conversation between you and Mr. Han could clarify certain misunderstandings before they escalate into territory that becomes difficult to manage for everyone. Misunderstandings, she said. The document in question, the voice said carefully, is a matter that could be resolved without court proceedings if both parties were willing to sit down and discuss a revised framework. The document in question is a forgery, she said, and this call is being recorded. A pause. Ms. Brooks, if Mr. Han has something to say to me, he can say it through his attorney to my attorney, she said. Do not call this number again. She ended the call, sat with it for a moment, then called Yoon and relayed the conversation word for word while it was still fresh, and listened to Yoon tell her to document the timestamp and not respond to any further contact. She also texted Do-hyun. Someone called me, offering a direct conversation with Min-seok to resolve the misunderstanding. Felt like pressure, not negotiation. His reply came faster this time, 2 words. I know. And then, 30 seconds later, don't go anywhere alone tonight. At 7 in the evening, Do-hyun returned. She heard the main gate and then footsteps in the courtyard, and then his voice, low and clipped, in conversation with Park. A brief exchange, a single word from Park that made Do-hyun stop walking for half a second before continuing. She was in the main hall when he came inside. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and the thing that passed between them in that look had no clean description. It was information, most of it not good. Sit down, he said, which was what Yoon had said to her this morning, and which she was beginning to find was the sentence people used when what they had to say required her to be stationary. She sat. He remained standing. She noticed he had not taken his jacket off, which meant he was not planning to stay in this room long. Min-seok met with someone this afternoon, he said, a man named Ryu. He runs private enforcement work, collections mostly, but the menu is broader than that. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. She felt the cold move through her chest again. She was getting better at not showing it on her face. When? She said. 2 hours ago? What was discussed? My source couldn't get audio, but Ryu's organization has a specific pattern of engagement. They don't take contracts for surveillance or intimidation. Their rate structure begins at a different level of intervention. She made herself hold his gaze. He hired someone to hurt me. Do-hyun looked at her for a moment. Or to remove the complication entirely, he said. I don't know which yet. The room was cold. The portable heater had been moved to the east wing for the contractors and hadn't been returned. The injunction hearing is in 4 days, she said. Yes. He's trying to make sure I don't get there. That's my assessment. She stood up. She needed to be vertical for this. Same reason she'd stood up in the hotel room, some bodily knowledge that horizontal was for rest, and this was not rest. What do we do? You don't go anywhere outside this property without 2 of my people, he said. Not 1, 2. That's going to be visible. If Min-seok is watching, I want it to be visible, Do-hyun said, and his voice had changed quality. Still level, still controlled, but something underneath it had compressed further, like pressure building in a system with no release valve. I want him to see the number of people between his contractor and you and make the calculation. She looked at him. You're not going to... She started. No, he said immediately. I'm not going to move on him directly. That creates legal exposure for you, and it gives him exactly the narrative he's trying to establish. I'm going to make sure that Ryu looks at the situation and decides the risk-benefit calculation doesn't work. He paused. Ryu is a businessman. Businessmen respond to cost-benefit analysis. And if he doesn't? Do-hyun met her eyes. Then I deal with it another way. She didn't ask what another way meant. She had stopped asking those questions because she understood by now that some answers were better lived with as abstractions. I need to keep working, she said. The East Wing structural work starts the day after tomorrow, and Beck needs me on site for the beam assessment. I can't do that from inside this property.
Beck's site is 8 minutes from here, Do-hyun said. We'll manage it. The next morning, Yoon called at 7:45. Dr. Choi had examined the original document and was prepared to testify that the signature was a skilled reproduction, not genuine, detectable through micropressure inconsistencies invisible to the naked eye, but clear under forensic analysis. The court had granted authorization. The clock was moving. At 8:30, Nia was in the East Wing with Baek, both of them in the compromised space under the damaged beams, while two of Do-hyun's people stood in the exterior doorway with the specific patience of people who have been trained to wait. Beck walked her through the structural findings with the same unsentimental precision as always, pointing to the rot patterns with a pencil, sketching load distribution options on a folded piece of paper. The work required her full attention, and got it. For 2 hours, nothing existed except the problem of the beams and the question of the original structure beneath the damage, and what could be saved versus what needed replacement. She was covered in plaster dust, and her knees ached from crouching, and she hadn't eaten since 6, and she felt, in the marrow of it, like herself. The version of herself that existed before Min-suk had spent 4 years telling her what she was. She was walking back across the courtyard at 11 when Park stepped forward. "Miss Brooks." His voice was very quiet. "Don't stop walking. Keep the same pace." Her heart rate spiked immediately, but she kept her stride. "There is a vehicle," Park said, matching her pace 2 steps to her left, "that has been parked at the end of the lane for 40 minutes. It was not there when we arrived." She kept walking, did not look toward the lane. "Someone in it?" "2 people, driver and passenger." "Ryu's people?" "I don't know yet. I've sent the plate to—" He paused, an ear to something small in his collar. "We're running it now." She reached the interior courtyard gate and went through it. Park came through behind her and pulled it closed. Inside the main house, Do-hyun was on the phone, standing near the window of the office. He saw her face when she came in and ended the call mid-sentence. She told him about the vehicle. He listened without interrupting. Then he looked at Park, who gave him the update on the plate in 3 words. She didn't catch them. They were too low and too fast. And something in Do-hyun's jaw changed. "It's Ryu's," he said to her. She stood very still. "They're not here for surveillance," he said. "Surveillance doesn't use 2 people in a vehicle parked at the end of a private lane in daylight." "Then what are they here for?" "Establishing the approach," he said. "Learning the entry points. How many people, where they are, the timing of movement in and out." He looked at Park. "Get Lee and move the vehicle configuration. I want 3 cars, not 2, and I want the approach to the lane covered from the north end." Park was already moving. Do-hyun looked at her. "We're moving you to a room in the main house. The caretaker's quarters are too exposed. The window faces the garden wall, and the garden wall faces the lane." "You think they'll come tonight?" He held her gaze. "I think Ryu is professional enough to do a proper approach assessment before committing. I think that's what today is, but I'm not going to assume tomorrow gives us more time than today." She absorbed this. "Call Yoon," he said. "Tell her you need the injunction hearing moved up, if there is any way to move it up. 1 day, 2 days, every day between now and that hearing is a day that—" Her phone rang. Both of them looked at it. Unknown number. She picked it up. "Nia." Min-suk's voice, not a proxy this time, him directly, and the sound of it in her ear after 2 weeks of distance hit her like something physical, that old Pavlovian response, the body's memory of what that voice meant in the context of 4 years. "I want you to listen to me." She said nothing. "This has gone further than it needed to," he said. I'm calling you directly because I want you to understand something. Whatever you think he is, whatever you think he can do, you are not inside anything that will protect you. You're inside something that is going to collapse. And when it does, anyone standing near it goes down with it. You hired Ryu, she said. A silence. Brief. I don't know what you think you know, he said. I know what Ryu's rate structure begins at, she said, and she heard Do-hyun go very still on the other side of the room. I know his people have been assessing the property approach for the last 4 hours. I know you met with him yesterday afternoon for 40 minutes. A pause, her own, deliberate. And I know that a forensic document examiner has already issued a preliminary finding on your addendum. So whatever you called to tell me, Min Seok, it's not working. The silence this time was longer. When he spoke again, something had gone out of his voice. Not the threat was still there, but the performance around it. What was left was something raw, something she hadn't heard from him in years, maybe ever. You have no idea what you've stepped into, he said quietly. With him. What his organization has done. What he's done personally. You think because he's been careful with you, he's a different kind of person, but you're building a house for a man who... Don't, she said, who has ordered things that you can't. Don't. Her voice was steady in a way that cost her something. You don't get to tell me who he is. You don't get to use that. Not you. Nia. You forged my signature, she said. You put a man in my hotel lobby. You hired someone who doesn't do surveillance. She paused. You are the thing I know. Whatever else exists in this world, I know exactly what you are. She ended the call. The room was absolutely quiet. Do-hyun was looking at her, and the look on his face was not the controlled, measured look she had catalogued over 2 weeks. It was something more exposed, something that the last 60 seconds had pulled up through whatever habitual surface he maintained, and it was directed at her with the full, undivided weight of it. He's going to move soon, she said. Her voice came out different than she expected, not frightened, which surprised her, but exhausted and precise. He knows the hearing is in 4 days, and he knows the forensic analysis is going to go against him, and he's going to decide that the hearing doesn't happen because I don't show up to it. Yes, Do-hyun said. So we need to take the hearing to him, she said. We need to file for the injunction hearing to be virtual, or to move the venue, or something that means he can't calculate where I'll physically be when it happens. Do-hyun looked at her for a moment. Yes. I'll have someone contact the court administrator. Tonight, she said. Not tomorrow. Tonight, he agreed. She sat down. The adrenaline was working its way through her system and leaving the particular fatigue that comes after, the bone-deep crash of a body that has been running on emergency fuel. Her hands, when she looked at them, were entirely steady, which struck her as almost funny. He said something, Do-hyun said carefully, about what I've done, what my organization has done. She looked at him. He wasn't lying, Do-hyun said. Not entirely. I want you to know that I'm aware of that. She held his gaze for a long time. I know you're not a good man, she said. I've known that since the café. I'm not confused about what you are. She paused, and the honesty of what she said next was the kind that arrives after enough crisis has burned away everything it wasn't. But in 4 years, my good husband never once thought about what I needed before what it cost him. And in 2 weeks, you've done nothing else. The room held that. Outside, Seoul was doing what it did, relentless and indifferent and vast. And somewhere at the end of the lane, Do-hyun's people had repositioned 3 vehicles. And somewhere in the city, Han Min Seok was making the next calculation. And the injunction hearing was 4 days away and might be less. And the old house creaked around them in the cold with all its centuries of survived contingency. Do-hyun looked at her with the expression of a man who had just received something he did not know what to do with, which was itself something coming from him. Her phone lit up on the table between them. Yoon. She reached for it, eyes still on his face for 1 more second before she looked down. Yoon's message read, Judge has agreed to expedite. Hearing moved to 9 a.m. day after tomorrow. Forensic testimony confirmed. Be ready. She turned the phone so Do-hyun could read it. He read it. His eyes came back to hers. Day after tomorrow, she said. Then tonight is the window, he said quietly. If he's going to move, it's tonight or early tomorrow. She looked at him. And? And I've been preparing for tonight since this afternoon, he said. That's what I was doing while you were with Bayek. She put the phone face down on the table. Outside, the lane was quiet in the way that things are quiet when they are being carefully watched from multiple directions. And the caretaker's quarters window faced the garden wall that faced the lane. And somewhere in the city, a man named Ryu was completing his approach assessment and making a decision. And Nia Brooks sat in the main hall of a 200-year-old house with its original ink markings and its cracked plaster and its ancestor's desk and felt, for the first time in years, the specific and unreasonable sensation of being exactly where she was supposed to be, right at the edge of the worst of it, with her eyes open. They came at 2 a.m, not with noise. That was the first thing she registered. Not an explosion of sound, but the opposite, a sudden and complete absence of the ambient sounds the night had been making, the distant traffic and the wind against the old tiles and the small, settling language of the house. All of it stopped at once, replaced by nothing, and the nothing was loud enough to pull her up out of the shallow, dressed sleep she'd managed on the narrow cot in the interior room Do-hyun had moved her to after dinner. She lay still for 3 seconds. Her heart was already running, her body having processed the information before her mind caught up. Then she heard the first voice outside, very low and very brief, cut off. She sat up. The room was an interior room, no windows, which she had hated when he'd insisted on it, and which she now understood was the point. She reached for her phone on the floor beside the cot. No new messages. She texted Do-hyun's number. I'm awake. Something's happening. The reply came in 4 seconds. Stay in the room, door locked. Don't open it for anyone unless I say your name first. She stood up anyway. Not to go anywhere. She had enough sense not to go anywhere, but because she could not be horizontal for this. She stood in the center of the small dark room in her clothes from yesterday, and her socks on the cold floor, and listened. What followed was not the sound she expected. No shouting, no running, just irregular silences and occasional short impacts. Not the crashing violence of films, but the real sounds of physical confrontation, which are smaller and more specific and more terrible. A voice saying something sharp and sudden in Korean, a heavy sound, something large making contact with the courtyard ground. A pause so complete it felt like held breath. Then Do-hyun's voice, measured, unhurried, saying her name once clearly through the door. She unlocked it. He was standing in the corridor, jacket gone, sleeves pushed up to the forearms. His face was entirely composed except for a small cut along the left side of his jaw that was bleeding in the way of face cuts, too much for its size. He looked at her for 1 second to confirm she was uninjured, and then looked back down the corridor. It's handled, he said. What happened? Ryu sent 3 people, he said. They came through the garden wall at the northwest corner, the section that's been braced with timber. He paused. They knew about the braced section. She absorbed that. The structural assessment was documented. Yes, someone provided them with the property layout. He looked at her directly. Not from my organization, from the contractor records. Min-sok had gone outside the obvious channels then, had found the information through the paper trail of the renovation itself. She had brought strangers into this house for weeks, and some of those strangers had been reachable. Where are they? She said. The 3 people. Being held in the East Wing, he said. My people have them. The police will be called in the morning. She blinked. You're calling the police? 3 men came onto private property at 2 a.m, he said. The circumstances are straightforward from an official standpoint. Whatever questions come with that, I've navigated before. A pause. And the police report becomes part of the record. It becomes part of what the judge sees in 48 hours. She understood. He was not calling the police because he needed them. He was calling them because it was the right instrument for this particular moment, and he was unsentimental enough about his own reputation to use whatever instrument worked. Your jaw, she said. He touched it briefly, almost absently. It looks worse than it is. That's usually what people say when it looks bad. He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it, but it came close. Seo appeared from the direction of the kitchen with a cloth and a small first aid kit, handed them to Do-hyun without expression, and went back the way he'd come. Do-hyun looked at the kit in his hands. "Sit down," she said. He sat, which surprised her. She took the kit from him and cleaned the cut with the particular focused efficiency she had applied to every other problem in this house. And she was close enough to him that she could hear his breathing, which was slower than hers. Slower than it should have been for someone who had just dealt with 3 men in the dark. The breathing of someone with such complete physical discipline that adrenaline barely touched his baseline. "Does it hurt?" she said. "Yes," he said, which was such a simple and undefended answer that it stopped her for a moment. "Good," she said. "Means you're still in there." She pressed a small bandage over the cut. He looked up at her from his seated position with an expression she had catalogued by now. Not his default, not his controlled presentation, but the thing underneath it, the version that only surfaced in rooms they were alone in, which had been more frequent as the weeks passed. "Ryu's people," she said, stepping back. "If Min Seok sent them knowing what they were for—" "He's beyond the document forgery now," Do-hyun said. "What happened tonight isn't something that can be walked back. The attempted break-in, 3 men, at this property, the night before a court hearing." He held her gaze. "He's made himself the story. Will he know it failed yet?" "Within the hour." "What does he do then?" Do-hyun stood. He was very close in the narrow corridor. A man who has just watched his last option fail either runs or doubles down. "Which does Min Seok do?" He held her gaze. "In my experience, men like your ex-husband don't run. They've spent too much of their life building a self-image that doesn't include retreat." "He doubles down," she said. "He doubles down." She thought about this. About Min Seok's voice on the phone stripped of its performance. About the cold quality of him that she had married before she understood what cold meant in that particular configuration. "Then we don't give him a surface to double down against," she said. "We take the hearing to him first." Do-hyun looked at her. "The venue change," she said. "Yoon said it was moving to virtual. If the hearing is virtual, Min Seok is at his attorney's office when it happens, or at home, wherever he's logged in from. He's not at a physical location we can't predict." She paused. "But we can make sure the judge sees the police report from tonight before 9 a.m. "Yoon can file an emergency supplement to the record," Do-hyun said slowly. "At 6 in the morning if she has to," Nia said. "I'll call her now." "It's 3 in the morning. I know what time it is," she said. He looked at her for a moment with that recalibrating quality she had stopped finding startling. Then he nodded once. She called Yoon. Yoon picked up on the second ring, which told Nia that Yoon had also been sleeping lightly or not at all, that she had been waiting for something like this, that she was the kind of attorney who prepared for the calls she hoped would not come. Nia told her everything in 6 minutes, fast and sequential, no editorializing. When she finished, there was a brief silence on the line. "Send me the police report number the moment it's issued," Yoon said. "I'll have an emergency supplement to the court record filed before 7. The judge reviews filings before 9. "What will it show him?" "It will show him," Yoon said, "that the man filing an injunction about your alleged exposure to criminal activity sent 3 men to a private property where you were staying on the night before the hearing." A pause. "It will make the injunction document look like what it is. Not legal argument, but operational cover." After she hung up, the house was quiet again. Real quiet this time. Not the predatory absence of sound from 2 hours ago, but the organic quiet of deep night in an old building with thick walls. Do-hyun had made tea. She didn't ask when. At some point between the phone call and her putting the phone down, he had moved to the kitchen and returned, and there were 2 cups on the table in the room he used as an office, and she sat down across from his empty chair and wrapped her hands around the cup. He came back in and sat. The bandage on his jaw was already doing what bandages do. "I want to ask you something," she said. "All right." "Min Seok said something on the phone," she said. "He said you've done things, ordered things." She looked at her tea. "I told him I didn't want to hear it, but I want to hear it from you." The silence had weight. "Yes," Do-hyun said. She waited. "I have ordered things," he said. "Actions taken against people who moved against my organization or against people under my protection. Not casually, not without—" He paused, choosing the word with care, accounting for it. "But yes, I have done that." "People have died," she said. Not a question.
Yes. She held that. She held the weight of it against the weight of everything else. The study with the inkstone, the contract with the creative authority clause, the way he had said her name that first time across a cafe table, the bandage on his jaw from a fight he had walked into so that 3 men didn't reach the room she was sleeping in. "I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter," she said. "I know," he said. "I wouldn't want you to. But I'm also not going to perform outrage I don't fully feel," she said, "because I don't know what I would have done if I'd lived your life. I don't know what I've been willing to do just to survive the one I had." She looked at him. "I just needed you to say it plainly." "I know," he said again. They sat with the tea and the cold in the quiet house for a while, not speaking, which by now had become its own language between them, one of the few she had ever shared with anyone that didn't require translation. At 5:30, the police arrived. They were not theatrical about it, 2 officers and a detective, doing their work with the professional thoroughness that comes with unusual hours and an unusual location. Do-hyun spoke with them in Korean while Nia sat in the main hall and gave her own statement through a translator the detective had brought, a young woman who rendered everything with scrupulous accuracy and no visible opinion. The 3 men from Ryu's operation were taken into custody. The detective photographed the northwest wall where the bracing timber had been forced, and the garden where footprints were visible in the softened winter ground. He was thorough. He didn't ask Do-hyun many questions, and the questions he asked were answered in ways that were complete and accurate and did not volunteer anything extraneous, and the whole thing was over by 7:45. By 7:50, Yoon had the report number. At 8:23, she sent Nia a message. "Supplement filed, judge has it. See you at 9. The virtual hearing was set up on Yoon's laptop, which sat on the conference table in her office with Nia beside it. Yoon had pulled her hair back and was in a jacket over whatever she'd been wearing at 3 in the morning, and she had the quality of someone running on conviction and caffeine and the particular focused energy of an attorney who believes she is about to win. Nia wore the same clothes she'd been wearing for 18 hours. She had washed her face and her hands. She had the bruise on her wrist, fully yellowed now but still visible, and she had decided not to cover it. At 9 o'clock exactly, the judge's face appeared on the screen. He was 60 or so, with reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead and the quality of someone who had been reading since well before 9. Min Seok's attorney appeared in a separate window. Min Seok himself was not on the call, which told Nia something immediately. He had been advised not to be visible, which meant his attorney expected the morning to go badly and wanted to limit the direct association. The judge looked at the screen over his glasses. "I've reviewed the supplemental filing," he said without preamble. "I have questions for counsel." What followed was 2 hours and 14 minutes of procedural legal argument, and Nia sat through all of it with her hands flat on the conference table and her breathing measured and her face as still as she could keep it. Yoon argued with the quiet precision of someone who has built a case over months and knows exactly where every brick is. Min Seok's attorney argued with the energy of someone whose ground has been compromised and who is working to minimize rather than win. The judge asked about the forged document. Dr. Choi's forensic testimony was entered into the record, every technical finding about micropressure inconsistencies and reproduced letter forms. The judge read it without expression. He asked about the events of the previous night. The police report was already in the record. He read that too. He asked Min Seok's attorney to explain the nature of the emergency injunction filing in light of the events documented in the police report. Min Seok's attorney said something about unrelated circumstances and coincidental timing, and Yoon said very quietly, "The plaintiff filed a document bearing a forged signature and then sent 3 individuals to the residence of the respondent on the eve of the hearing, Your Honor. The court may determine for itself whether the circumstances are unrelated." The judge looked at his screen for a long time. "The injunction is denied," he said. "The forged document is referred to the Criminal Division for investigation. The original settlement framework is reinstated. We will proceed with the scheduled divorce finalization on the basis of the original agreed terms." He looked at Min Seok's attorney over his reading glasses. "Counsel will advise his client," the judge said, "that any further interference with settlement proceedings will be treated as contempt. We are adjourned." The screen went dark. Yoon closed the laptop with both hands, slowly and deliberately, the way you close something that has held a great deal. The room was quiet. Nia looked at the closed laptop and felt not the explosion of relief she had expected, not the cathartic release of months of built pressure. What she felt instead was something quieter and less dramatic. A simple, exhausted settling, like something that has been held at tension for too long finally being set down on a flat surface. "It's not over," Yoon said after a moment. "The criminal referral will move slowly. Min Seok will face consequences for the forgery, but the wheels move at their own pace." "I know," Nia said. "And the three men from last night, their connection to him will be difficult to prove directly. Ryu runs a buffer operation." "I know that too." Yoon looked at her. "You're not celebrating." "I'm tired," Nia said simply. "I'll celebrate when I've slept." Yoon almost smiled. That's the most sensible thing anyone has said in this office in weeks. The actual divorce finalization hearing was 11 days later, after the scheduled date had been kept but shifted to accommodate the aftermath of the injunction proceedings. It was in person, in a small courtroom that smelled of old paper and institutional cleaning product, and it lasted 47 minutes. Min-seok was there. He had to be. He sat across the room in a dark suit with his attorney beside him, and he looked different. Not smaller exactly, but compressed somehow. The specific compression of a person who has used pressure as a primary mode of operation for so long that when the pressure has nowhere to go, it turns inward. He did not look at Naya when she came in. He looked at her once, during the reading of the terms. Just once, briefly, and what was in the look was not the thing she had been afraid of for years, not the cold assessment of a man calculating his next move. It was something more ordinary and more human, and somehow worse. It was the look of a person who has done a great deal of damage and is beginning to understand the dimensions of it. She held his gaze for 3 seconds and then looked at the judge. The terms were read. The inheritance protection stood. The asset division stood. The protection order, which Yoon had added in the weeks following the injunction, stood. Min Seok signed where he was required to sign, in the order he was required to sign without speaking. When it was done, the judge declared the marriage dissolved, and Nia Brooks sat in a courtroom in Seoul and was legally, finally, completely herself. She did not cry. She had been afraid she would, not from sadness, but from the sheer accumulated pressure of everything that had led to this room, and she had spent some energy being afraid of that particular vulnerability. It didn't happen. She just sat with the fact of it, the way you sit with something that is simply true, not joyful, not devastating, just real. Outside the courthouse on the steps, in the cold winter air, Yoon handed her a copy of the final order in a manila envelope. "Get some sleep," Yoon said. "You too," Nia said. Yoon looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who wants to say something that is not professional and is deciding whether to say it anyway. "You handled this well," Yoon said finally. "All of it, better than most people would." Nia looked at the envelope in her hands. "I had good people," she said. That made a difference. She meant it about Yoon. She meant it about more than Yoon. She took a taxi back to the property alone, which was the first time she had been without one of Do-hyun's people in 11 days, and which felt, in its small way, like its own kind of statement. The city moved around the taxi window the way it always moved. Its enormous, indifferent continuity, its refusal to be impressed by any single person's private catastrophe or survival. She had been in Seoul for 3 years. She had come here for a marriage and stayed for a career and survived things she had not planned on surviving. And the city was still just the city. 10 million lives running simultaneously, none of them pausing for hers. And she found, for the first time, that this felt like companionship rather than indifference. She was part of the texture of this place now. She had earned that. Do-hyun was waiting in the main courtyard. Not at the gate this time. In the courtyard, sitting on the stone step at the entrance to the main hall, with his jacket on and his hands resting loosely between his knees, looking like a man who has been sitting there for a while and is not uncomfortable with that. She came through the gate and stopped when she saw him, and they looked at each other across the courtyard. "How was it?" he said. 47 minutes, she said. Then it was done. He nodded. She crossed the courtyard and sat beside him on the step, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the cold air. They sat like that for a moment, not speaking, looking at the courtyard that she had spent weeks moving through with tape measures and notebooks, and the particular love she felt for spaces that were telling their own story. "I finished the room assessment," she said. "All of them. I have a complete proposal for the remaining phases." "I know. Seo told me you were working through it last week. You have spies everywhere." "Seo tells me things," he said. "That's different from spies." "Is it?" "He also makes tea," Do-hyun said, "which spies rarely do." She almost laughed. It was closer than his almost smile in the corridor. It actually arrived, small and tired and real. The winter light on the courtyard stones was low and angled, the specific quality of light in Seoul in January that makes everything look like it has been there for a long time and intends to stay. The persimmon tree in the northwest corner of the garden had lost all its leaves and stood bare and precise against the white sky. "I need to tell you something," Nia said. She felt him still beside her. "I'm not going to make a decision about what happens between us while I'm still living inside your house, on your property, with your people around me," she said. "Not because I don't know what I feel, but because I spent 6 years learning that the circumstances you're in shape what you think you feel, and I don't trust any version of myself that hasn't had some room." He said nothing, which was the right thing. "So I'm going to finish the restoration," she said. "I'm going to see the east wing through and the study and the garden wall and the ondol system, and when the house is done, I'm going to go back to my apartment, which I am going to reclaim, because letting Min Seok make me afraid of my own address is something I'm done with. And then I'm going to see what I know when I'm standing on ground that's mine." Do-hyun turned his head and looked at her. The bandage on his jaw was gone, replaced by a small healing line that would probably leave a faint mark. "That's fair," he said. "It might take several months," she said. "The restoration." "I know how long it will take," he said. "You told me in the second week. I just want to make sure you understand what I'm saying." "I understand," he said. "You're telling me that you're not leaving and you're not staying, and that the distinction matters to you." "Yes," she said. "Then I'll wait," he said, simply. Not as a performance of patience, not as a man confident in the outcome, but as a plain statement of what he intended to do. She looked at the courtyard. "You waited before," she said. "In the library. When I—" She paused. "Yes," he said, not requiring her to finish it. She nodded. They sat together in the cold for a while longer, on the stone step of the old house, and the city ran its 10 million simultaneous lives around them, and the winter light moved across the courtyard stones, at the angle that stones have been receiving it for 200 years, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with anything it didn't require. The restoration took 4 months and 9 days. The east wing came first. The beam replacements, the structural reinforcement, the weeks of slow, careful work that Beck supervised with her unsentimental pencil and her folded papers. Nia was on site for every significant decision, crouched under new timber that smelled of fresh-cut wood in a space that had smelled of rot for decades, and the change between the two was one of the most satisfying things she had experienced in her professional life. The West Garden Wall was rebuilt in February by a stonemason Nia found through a preservation network, a man in his 60s who had spent his life working with this specific type of regional stone, and who communicated with it the way her grandmother had communicated with rooms, as something that had its own intention and deserved to be understood before it was touched. She and the stonemason did not speak the same language. They communicated through gesture and materials and the universal grammar of people who care about the same kind of thing, and by the time the wall was done, she considered him one of the better professional relationships of her career. The ondol system, the original underfloor heating, the channels, and the fireboxes, was partially salvageable. Not all of it. 3 sections had to be reconstructed from documentation rather than remaining evidence, and she spent 2 weeks in the Seoul Metropolitan Archive pulling records and cross-referencing with what the physical evidence in the floor could tell her. She did this work alone mostly, in the quiet of the archive with its particular institutional silence, and she was good at it, had always been good at the solitary research part of restoration, the detective work that happened before the visible transformation. She went back to her apartment in early February. She changed the locks first, had the building security reviewed, and then she walked through every room of the space she had been paying for and not living in, and stood in it and made it hers again,
one deliberate hour at a time. She did not feel afraid in it. She had expected to, and she did not, which was itself a piece of information about what the last several months had changed. She kept the card on her kitchen counter, not prominently, not displayed, nothing like that, just present, the way significant objects are sometimes kept in the field of ordinary vision so that you don't lose track of what they represent. The study was last, as he had asked. She had been careful with it throughout, had done her documentation and her assessment and filed everything meticulously, and had otherwise let the room simply be what it was while the rest of the house was attended to. By the time she turned to it in late March, the house around it had been transformed, and the study existed in its original state like a seed that the fruit had grown around. She worked in it for 3 weeks. The books were cataloged and conserved by a specialist she brought in from a university archive, a meticulous woman who handled each volume with cotton gloves and treated the process with the kind of focused reverence that very old things deserve. The shelves were cleaned and the wood treated, and where pieces were missing, she had new pieces made from the same species of wood, aged to match. The inkstone she did not touch except to clean it, very gently, with materials the conservator specified. It stayed on the desk where it had been for 2 centuries. She replaced the broken shutter latch with a reproduction made from original hardware specifications. The window, when open, still looked directly at the persimmon tree in the northwest corner. On the last day of work in the study, she stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, the way she had turned in the very first room she'd assessed in this house, the room with the cracked pot and the tape on the paper screens. And what she found was not perfect. The colors were close but not identical to the original. The replaced shelf sections were correct in dimension but slightly lighter in tone. The room bore the evidence of its own survival. The things that had happened to it over 2 centuries, the repairs, the losses, the adaptation. It was more honest for all of that, more true to what a room that has lived through time actually is. She went to find Do-hyun. He was in the main hall, which had been the last major space to be completed, where the original plasterwork had been restored to the ochre gold she had uncovered in that first stripped section, and the wooden ceiling beams had been treated and the floor had been refinished, and the room was warm in a way that made it look like it had been waiting to be this warm for a very long time. He was standing in the center of it, not doing anything, just standing there. She had learned over the months that this was something he did, stood in completed spaces and was still in them, as if he was doing some internal accounting that required the silence. "The study is done," she said. He turned. They walked to it together. She let him go in first and stood in the doorway, watching him move through the room the way she had watched him that first time. The slow circuit, the particular quality of his attention when it landed on things that mattered to him. He stopped at the desk, looked at the inkstone, looked at the window and the persimmon tree beyond it. She watched something move through him, the same thing as before, but deeper now, 7 generations of something finding a room that had been returned to itself. He turned around and looked at her in the doorway. "It's right," he said. "Yes," she said. "How did you know what the original floor color was? The records I found didn't specify." "There was a fragment under the left shelf support," she said, "where it had been protected from light. The colorist matched it." She paused. "Your ancestor had good taste." "He built a room for a woman who deserved better than she was given," Do-hyun said. "He did it as well as he knew how." The sentence sat between them with its own specific weight. She crossed from the doorway to the desk and looked at the inkstone and the window and the tree. "The house is done," she said. "I know." "I need to send you the final invoice," she said, "and the conservation documentation. The archive file is extensive. It should be kept with the property records." "I'll have Seo collect it." She nodded, looked at the window. "I've been back in my apartment for 6 weeks," she said. "I know," he said. "Min Seok's criminal referral went to indictment last week. Yoon called me." She paused. "Document forgery and the conspiracy charge related to the men Ryu sent. His attorney is negotiating. He'll accept something reduced." "He won't go to prison," Do-hyun said. "It was not a judgment, just an accurate reading of how these things moved." "No," she said. "But he'll have a record, and the protection order is permanent." She looked at the tree through the window. "He's already applied to transfer his firm's registration to Busan." "Running," Do-hyun said. "Finally," she said. A silence. Not uncomfortable. The specific silence of a room that has been restored to what it was built to be, the silence of something complete. I want to tell you something, she said, still looking at the tree. About the 4 years. About what it did. He waited. He didn't just hurt me, she said. He convinced me it was the correct response to who I was, that the diminishment was proportionate, that I was... She paused, and the pause cost something. A person who required that, who had produced it. She turned from the window and looked at him. I believed that for a long time. I was still believing it when I sat across from him in that cafe. Do-hyun held her gaze without flinching. I know, he said. You couldn't have known that then, she said. No, he said. But I know it now. I've watched you work in this house for 4 months. He paused, and what he said next was not smooth, was not the controlled register he usually occupied. It came from somewhere else, from the part of him that the study and the inkstone and the months of evenings in unfinished rooms had reached. I have watched you listen to what a space needs before you change anything about it. I have watched you care about getting something right even when no one would notice the difference. I have watched you be so certain of your own eye that you argued with me 3 times and were correct all 3 times. He held her gaze. None of that is the behavior of someone who needed what he did to her. She stood very still. She had expected, when someone said something true to her, to feel something operatic, the years of it releasing all at once in some cinematic moment. What she felt instead was quieter than that. A simple internal settling, not unlike what she had felt in the courthouse after the divorce was finalized. The recognition of a true thing said plainly, finding the place in her where the corresponding damage lived, and beginning the slow and undramatic work of displacement. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said. It's a factual account of what I observed. The echo of what she had said to him months ago, in this same house, in a different room. She almost smiled. It made it all the way. I know what I feel, she said. I told you I needed to know it from ground that was mine. I know it from there now. He was very still. I'm not asking you to be something you're not, she said. I'm not asking you to explain every decision you've made or account for everything your organization has done. I'm not, she paused, naive about what it means to be near you. I understand the shape of it. It's a complicated shape, he said. I know complicated shapes, she said. I've been working in this house for 4 months. This time he did smile, small and real and unhurried. She crossed the room to him, 4 steps across the original floor in the light from the window, and when she reached him, she took his face in both her hands, carefully, avoiding the healed line on his jaw, and looked at him directly the way she had looked at rooms, without romance, without illusion, with the full attention of someone who intends to understand what they're looking at. I'm choosing this, she said. I want you to hear that. Not because I'm afraid, not because you protected me, not because I'm grateful. Because I'm standing on my own ground making my own choice. His hands came to her arms, her forearms, not gripping, holding, the way you hold something you understand the value of. I hear it, he said. She kissed him in the restored study of a house that had been built 200 years ago by a man who understood that the most significant thing he could construct was a space worthy of the person he loved. And outside the window, the persimmon tree stood bare and patient against the January sky. And Seoul ran its 10 million lives in every direction around them, and the house was complete. They stood on the rooftop in April. She had suggested it, and he had not asked why because by now he could read the rhythm of her, that she needed to see things from height sometimes, to re-establish the scale of what she was inside. She was the same about buildings. The city from up here was what it always was, enormous and lit and indifferent and beautiful in the way that only things that don't care about being beautiful can be. She could see the line of hills to the north where the old neighborhoods folded up against the sky, and somewhere in that fold the lane that ended at a gate she had first walked through in early November. Do-hyun stood beside her with his hands on the roof railing and looked at the city he had moved through for his entire adult life, the thing he had built and maintained and defended, and that had always, as he had told her once in a not-quite answer, felt insufficient on its own terms. I want to ask you something, she said. All right. The work I did here, she said, the restoration, I want to propose something to Seo about the northern room. There's a damp issue I identified in the final assessment that needs to be addressed in the next year, and I want to specify the repair method so it doesn't compromise what we did with the plaster. He looked at her. You're asking to stay involved. I'm asking to stay involved with the building, she said. Those are different things with different terms. Yes, he said, his voice carrying the very faint quality of amusement that she had come to recognize as one of the few forms of lightness he allowed himself. They are. The building terms, she said, are that I consult on any future work, my specifications, my sign-off. Agreed. The other terms, she said, looking at the city, are still being written. He looked at her profile. I know, he said. I'm patient. You're controlling, she said. Patience is different. I'm learning the difference, he said. She looked at him sidelong. You are, she said, with the directness she'd been using on him since a cold corridor in November. That matters. They stood there together as the April night came on around them, the sky going from deep blue to the ambient orange that big cities make, the kind of sky that has no stars but has its own luminosity, the accumulated light of millions of lives in close proximity. She thought about Atlanta, her mother's kitchen, $40, and a set of opinions about how to keep a house. She thought about a woman named Ida, who had taught her to listen to what a room needed before she changed anything. She thought about a cafe table and a voice that had said her name across it for the first time. She was 34 years old, and she was on a rooftop in Seoul in April, and she had built something here. Not just in this house, not just in the rooms she had argued into being what they were supposed to be, but in herself, from the specific materials that 4 years of erosion had left behind. The kind of building you do not from untouched material, but from salvage. The kind that is stronger in the places it was broken because you have understood, finally, exactly what you are working with. She reached out and put her hand over his on the railing. He turned his hand and held hers. Below them, Seoul continued without pause or sentiment, 10 million lives moving forward in 10 million directions, and they stood above it together, a woman who had learned to be uncertain without being afraid, and a man who was learning, for the first time in a life built on control, that the most significant territory he had ever claimed was the small particular space between one person's open hand and another's. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything.